Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast, and Happy New Year to all of you listening or watching today. It's a brand new year, 2024. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
Happy New Year. Hopefully this year will bring us a lot of great grace from the Lord as we continue to have fun here on this podcast.
Especially with new resolutions and all those new things that we kind of add into our schedules and our things. I'm hoping to get a lot out of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what's a common resolution for the new year? Is people want to get fit. Most people, not me. But most people say, they want to join a gym, or gym memberships go up during this
all of a sudden there's
time.
There's a sale on treadmills. And,
yes,
like
exactly. And people are starting to be a little more health conscious. New year, new me. That's people say. So I mean, of course, by all means, I think that's great. If people wanted to get in better shape, get in better health, but I always remind people that if we're getting in better physical health and better mental health and better emotional health, we also should strive to be in better spiritual health as well. So maybe there's some spiritual resolutions we can make as the new year begins. Okay, so when people talk about getting in shape, right? That's the big thing for our new year. So the question always comes all the time about yoga.
Yeah.
And can Catholics practice yoga? Which is a really good question because it depends. Sometimes you get a couple different answers. Some people say, well, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
And some people say, no, not at all. Yeah. Absolutely not. Right? So let's talk a little bit about yoga today. And maybe we'll feel inclined to get in shape this year, too, after all this fitness talk.
Let's break it open, though. Like, what is yoga? Specifically.
So it's funny because yoga, there's a range of things that people could like. Some people actually just mean stretching. They just mean, I roll out this little mat and I do this sequence of 10 exercises and I'm done. But yoga itself is a thing that is it's referring to a practice, and that practice doesn't necessarily, but can encompass a lot of other things that are, the spoiler alert, the conclusion we'll get to are kind of incompatible with our faith. So, on just the kind of simple minimalist level, it involves kind of stretching, to exercise. And if you get into more kind of complex or advanced forms of yoga, they what they refer to as 8 different branches of yoga, and these are things like controlling breathing, that's a big aspect of it. Self-discipline and self-mastery. There's active separation of yourself from kind of the material world. There's an opening of yourself to, in kind of more sanitized versions, the universe broadly, but in kind of the more religious expression to Hindu gods, to Brahman, to and then you get into kind of things with aligning chakras and energy and energy healing and just kind of the far-reaching stuff. What's the other one? Third eye, kind of that your perception beyond kind of the material realm. But of these, and if you're looking at kind of ancient, the stretching or exercise part of yoga is actually one of the lesser branches. It's not it's not the kind of the main thing or the central focus of yoga. So to kind of answer the question, is this something I should be involved in? The answer is, if it's tied to all these other things, no, just kind of a hard no. But if it's just kind of stretching, you probably shouldn't call it yoga, just because, again, it has the association with all of these other things. And separating out the exercise from all of these other things, and particularly and especially kind of the breathing kind of part of it, is maybe a bit more easier said than done. It's a bit more kind of difficult than just kind of saying, okay, well, I'm just going to do these exercises and not participate in anything else. The exercises themselves and the forms themselves may not be kind of intrinsically wrong, but again, there are certain representations that you should probably actively avoid.
Yeah, some of the things you were saying, controlling your breathing, doing all these different things, those. There's nothing intrinsically wrong about any of them.
Yeah. They're all immoral. amoral, right?
So people might say, well, what's the big deal? But you're right that there's this association with spirituality that belongs to the Hindu faith, right? And I think the Ministry of External Affairs for the government of India has this whole thing on their website about what yoga is and why people should use it. And a number of the things that they say are that it is a ground. It's to bring the mind and the body in harmony. So when people hear something like that, there's nothing wrong with that. People say, "Oh, my mind and body in harmony." Well, that would be great, right? Look at us. We're always running to and fro and doing things. It would be great to have our mind and body in harmony, right? But then, as it continues on, they're saying that the practice is a spiritual discipline, right? And they're saying that yoga existed for long time, like at the dawn of civilization, is what they're saying.
Thousands of years,
right. So there's something more to yoga than what people think. And then it starts to talk about being grounded with the universe, right? And so it starts to sound a little
more religious,
a little more religious, a little more spiritual.
And I think that's the problem right there. What you're suggesting is because when people get involved with, let's say, the practice of yoga, and you have people like we said, and good Catholics, I'm going to say, that are in both camps, that are like, no, yoga is intrinsically evil, and then other people, there's no, yoga is really good. I even had so we had this discussion one time in one of the churches I was working in. 15, 20 years ago. And the priest, they advertised this yoga program at the church. And the priest was fielding questions right, left, and center from it, especially because it was directed towards teens. And the priest was like, well, what's the problem with yoga? I did yoga in the seminary when I was, the seminarians were asked to do yoga when he was, and I was like, oh, so we had to really dive into it. Is it wrong? Is it not wrong? And I think that's the problem right there, is what we kind of just talked about. If we're calling it yoga, then it's tied automatically to some of these things. And so when you're starting to do the stretches, no, they're not, they're amoral, they're not bad. But what happens is if you start feeling good and you start putting this is actually good for me, this is really kind of good, you're going to start to go down that path. Just like anybody coming into the Catholic Church, if they feel a sense of peace and adoration or something like that, they're going to start to, let's start looking more deeper into the Catholic faith. You're going to have someone do the opposite way. So you're going to have, let's I'm going to do hot yoga next, where, I'm going to go do my breathing, I'm going to do this, that, and the other, maybe meditative yoga, and slowly enter down the path. And it's the danger with stretching as yoga is I would say it's a gateway to the practice of yoga that eventually becomes a religious experience. Yeah. And that's the problem that we have to be very weary of.
I'm going to just read something here. Yeah. It says that yoga is an art and science of healthy living. The word yoga is derived, this is from the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India. The word yoga is derived from the Sanskrit root yuj, which means to yoke.
Okay.
And as per...
like to burden. Is that what it means?
To bind.
To bind.
Yeah, to bind. And so as per yogic scriptures, it says the practice of yoga leads to the union of individual consciousness with that of universal consciousness, indicating a perfect harmony between the mind and body, man and nature. Right? So right off the bat, that's in the very first introduction for yoga. So there's a spiritual connotation to it. And I'm reminded here when it uses the word yoke, right? I'm reminded about the words of Jesus, that we are to bear his yoke, right? From Matthew chapter 11, verse 30. Anyways, I think you're right when we start to get down it, but I think it's hard to explain to people what's the big deal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They'll say, I'm not praying, I'm not doing this. Well, part of the big deal is that, and I'm going to say this off the bat, most people who take yoga or most people who practice yoga, I think today, probably are just exercising.
Yeah.
They're stretching, maybe they're doing some leg stretches, arm stretches, whatever. And not so much, when I think of yoga, I think of the poses the breathing, like all that stuff, because the poses in yoga do have spiritual connection to them.
Yeah, and so a lot of times you're posing in certain ways to align yourself with a certain line of thinking, specifically aligning yourself to a certain god in Hinduism, and so they have those names: upward dog, downward dog, soldier 1, soldier 2, those poses. I did so. Point blank, all cards on the table. I did the P90X program, and they do 1 day of yoga a week, and I was doing it with the program, and it was just stretching. That's all it was. But all those names were still there in the title, and so when you start looking into it, you start kind of diving into it a little bit deeper. You're realizing, that like we're gonna go upward. Where the sun, the sun, like the positions that you're holding are specifically designed as you get deeper into yoga to worship or to align yourself with certain gods and certain things.
It's right in the name. If yoga means to yoke, or what you said, Matt, to bind, it's binding ourselves to something. So what is it binding us to?
Yeah, so the names themselves, it's interesting, and and if we're saying even if there's nothing kind of intrinsically wrong with that motion, or assuming that particular position, the names themselves were attached to what were kind of pre-existing would be exercise poses from just flexibility exercises for gymnastics or for wrestling or for whatever. And in my kind of research, that a lot of these weren't associated with kind of the practice of yoga itself until the early 20th century. That these were kind of co-opted, or these were kind of brought into yoga, and again, given that significance tied to kind of the more religious aspect. But again, it's not necessarily something in if you do this pose, if you accidentally drop your keys and you go pick them up, you're not accidentally worshiping Shiva. But again, some people do have this association, and again, to kind of separate our association with these poses from the religious practice actually becomes quite difficult when this becomes a really, really common understanding of what you're involved with.
And when you're using the name specifically yoga, because that automatically ties you back to that. So I think, as we're saying, stretching itself is not a bad thing. And in fact, a lot of the stretching and breathing exercises and those types of things that are associated now that we just kind of bind into the term yoga, the problem becomes separating. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians, is it 8, verse 10, right? And that's the whole where St. Paul's talking about, if I'm doing yoga, and this was my defense when I was doing it, and I come around this way of thinking to a different point, but I was doing the yoga because it was a P90X, and I was doing it with a group, and I was doing the yoga, and I didn't feel I'm not, and the moves in the exercise program, it wasn't really it's about exercise, it's about stretching, it's not specifically about meditative into gods or what this, that, and the other thing. But what comes to me is in that Bible verse specifically, St. Paul says, okay, you can eat meat that's been offered to idols. That we know there's no other God. So it's not like this meat is going to harm you in that way. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But that meat's not going to harm you.
Yeah.
But what if someone else sees you eating that meat?
Yeah.
And you cause them then to think that it's okay.
Yeah.
Meaning they don't know what my intent is. So my intent, I'm going to say that point blank, the intent of stretching isn't wrong. In fact, stretching itself is amoral in that sense, right? But then when you go into someone else seeing me do these poses in the park on a yoga mat, if let's say the case may be, now they say, oh, Josh is doing that, and I know Josh to be a good guy, maybe a godly guy, hopefully, those kind of things. And if he's doing yoga, then yoga must be okay. Yeah. And they don't understand my intent is actually I'm just stretching here. Yeah. You know what I mean? And if they think, well, he's in a yoga class, it's called yoga. He's just stretching, but it's in a yoga class. Now, someone else seeing that takes that intent and realize oh, Josh is eating the meat that's offered up to idols. It must be okay to worship these idols, the same kind of thing, right? And so, if that's the intent that I'm giving off, I'm not giving off on purpose, but if I'm still causing that idea to happen, I have to be very careful about that. And so, what we're doing then is I'm just stretching, but I'm causing other people to go down a path. And okay, well, I'm going to go to yoga. I'm not going to go to the same class as Josh. I'm going to go to another yoga. And maybe they start down a path then that's a little bit wrong. Yeah. So we got to be very careful that when we're talking about this or when we're doing these types of things, again, stretching not a problem, but the perception of the stretching. So stretch, go ahead, stretch. why not stretch without a yoga mat?
Yeah.
Why not stretch without being in that very specific dress that yoga uses or in a yoga class? Just do your stretching.
Yeah.
Don't call it the names that are associated with yoga. Don't call it yoga.
Yeah.
Just call it stretching. You know what I mean? And so if we do that, if we were to separate that completely, because stretching out your grind, stretching out your legs, stretching out your arms, like none of that's a wrong thing, except if you're tying it to a specific religion, that and the other.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, in case we haven't been clear already, which I was just kind of reviewing in my mind what you've said already, but because maybe to be clear, yoga is a practice of Hindu spirituality.
Yeah.
So that's right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right. So as Catholics, we belong to Jesus Christ. We are Christian, and so we don't assent to teachings of the Hindu faith, or we don't look up to gods that the Hindu faith might believe in. And part of yoga that is wrong, we're talking about stretching and all these different things. Well, people will say, well, I just want to make it clear that it's not all just about stretching and raising your mind to Hindu gods, because some of the poses actually have ties to some Hindu gods, and through yoga, people are invoking those Hindu gods, right? And from our perspective as Christians, some of these Hindu gods, we would probably say, aren't very morally sound, right? Like there's a 3-part warrior pose.
Yeah,
right?
warrior 1, warrior 2, warrior 3.
Yeah, and that invokes the god Virabhadra, right? The 3 poses actually imitate the sequence of the murder of Shiva's father-in-law, who created Virabhadra. So, there's some morally
as you're going through the poses, you're kind of reliving an action of some sort.
Another pose. You invokes someone who had used occult powers to commit theft, adultery, things like that. So some of these things that we would say are morally empty or morally not right. So it's not just about the stretching and what we would maybe call praying, raising your mind to God. Yeah. It's not just about raising your mind to the gods. It's that these poses, together with the spiritual side, are invoking some of these Hindu gods that are that I would say, and maybe you would say, and maybe the church would say, are dangerous for our spiritual life.
Yeah.
We're opening the door to something that's not good for our spiritual life.
It's also kind of like, if you think about it, it would be something like, imagine people, imagine you were sitting there and you saw somebody in the bus station just start standing up, kneeling, sitting down, kneeling, standing up, blessing themselves, you know what I mean? It would almost be like, what the heck are they doing? They're doing it out of context, but it's obviously that they're reflecting maybe a Catholic mass or something like that. It's almost like they're making fun of it in a way, or, maybe they're not making fun of it. Maybe they're using it, but you're going what is going on? So to even show that respect, we're not disrespecting your faith. We don't want to disrespect your faith. We're not making light of it. We're not trying to, we're going to distance ourselves completely from it. You know what I mean? So showing another person or another faith, if that will complete separation, we're not trying to mingle, not in a bad way, just to not cause any of that kind of, distinction. Okay. Now there are, you can do good Catholic stretches. There are different programs out there. You know what I mean?
Catholic
stretches. I mean by that is, so there's one of the ones that we ended up proposing at this time was because it was a big thing, and we had to really, when I was dealing with this thing in this parish, we changed it. We said, okay, we're not doing yoga anymore. Yoga's wrong. We are going to do Catholic exercises, and we're going to call it Catholic exercises. It's going to have no ties to yoga. There are going to be stretches, and specifically, we ended up going mostly female, and so the women that took over were mostly female women. To guided towards women stretching, not just open to everybody. And what they did was a program called, I remember.
Is it Soulcore?
Soulcore, yeah, that was the one. And so Soulcore, and what that was you did stretches you did specifically designed stretches in a meditative state to the rosary. Yeah. And so the rosary is so you're directed through these stretches and stuff. It is going to sound very similar, but the focus here is that your meditative state is going constantly to the rosary, to parts of Jesus' life, is focusing on that. So now your prayer is all about this. The terms, the positions, the stretches themselves have nothing to do with tying themselves to yoga.
Yeah, and in the beginning we said that like it actually becomes very, very difficult to separate the exercises from the other kind of spiritual aspects of yoga and kind of by extension kind of Hindu spirituality. But it is possible. Like I think Soulcore actually does a really good job in just really doing a full rebrand.
Yeah.
Like not referring to it as yoga because again it's not that thing, but actually like renaming all of the poses, all of the stretches, taking whatever meditative aspect that would kind of otherwise accompany the practice, and directing that towards prayer. And
towards God,
primarily the rosary,
yeah.
But also a number of other kind of traditional Catholic prayers as well. So again, it is very difficult. But it is possible to do that again in an isolated way because again we want to kind of make sure that we're accountable to the Corinthians passage as well because like again context matters. If you can have the rosary playing in your earphones and be doing Soulcore or some kind of full rebrand of these practices. It's like, but there's a difference between you doing that in your house, in your living room, and doing that in your classroom with big glass windows above. Because again, they don't know that that's what you're doing, and by all kind of appearance and accounts, it looks like you're doing yoga. I'm like, oh, Josh does yoga. Josh is cool, so I'm going to do yoga.
Do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's really kind of cool though that if you were to take that spiritual practice of maybe stretching and meditating at the same time and making it Catholic, it's something that we've done, like Christianity has done from the get-go, right? Is taking pagan rituals and celebrations and those types and making them Catholic and making like, hey, you want to celebrate, winter's over or like, the season of the dead and now life is coming back. We're going to offer you Jesus at Christmas time. You know what I mean? You want to start talking about talking to the dead and all that kind of stuff. We're going to offer you All Souls Day, All Saints Day, All Souls Day. Like all those kind of things. That's what we've done. We've rebranded a lot of different pagan rituals and stuff to make them Christian again so that we can practice and so that people don't have to give up. I'm not going to say people can take the goodness that is in certain things and make it holy. You know what I mean?
The church doesn't encounter the world in a cultural vacuum. The church enculturates and really goes through a discernment process of like, these are the good aspects of culture. Mm-hmm. We need to like actively separate it from the bad. And you have a lot of like the artistic traditions, the liturgical traditions of the church. Like even we talk about like Latin in Mass. That's enculturation. That's something we took. That this is something good from the Roman Empire. We're going to move this forward. So there are all kinds of examples of that, kind of historically.
Yeah. I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
People say, well, as long as you throw out the spiritual side, you could just do the stretches. That's what people have said, and by all means, I might say that as well. But St. Thomas Aquinas, rather. He says that actions have an objective meaning.
Oh,
right?
Oh, yeah, interesting.
That the goodness or malice which the external action has of itself is not derived from the will, but rather from the reason, right? Mm. So what's the reason? Actions have their own nature, right?
Yeah.
So even actually, this is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It teaches that for an act to be good, it has to have a good moral object, right? Which is intrinsic to its nature and independent of intent, right? A good intention does not make behavior that is intrinsically disordered good or just, is the Catechism 1753. So if our intention is just to do the spiritual exercises, like is
to not do the
intent itself does not qualify, and like I think that needs to be said, like because you can slip into some really bad practices just like with good intent.
Yeah.
That I want to celebrate some I like, and I have a drink. If I do that too many times, I'm in a compromised moral state.
Right.
I was like, but I think the Thomas, I think that's really important that it's qualified by reason. That it's like the reason more so than the intent, or even to the exclusion of intent, is actually what qualifies the act. So just like even that, like if I accidentally do a yoga pose, picking up my keys, the reason that I'm doing this is not even to exercise, that the act itself, and the reason around it is what qualifies whether this is kind of a good or bad moral act. We, jokingly, not that it's anything to joke about, but before the episode, just like if you're hailing a cab and you accidentally do a gesture that could be associated with, something much, much worse. Yeah. Again, that's qualified by reason. Your reason for assuming that position or that pose is to hail a cab. You have no kind of ill or kind of adverse kind of. I'm avoiding using the word intent, but you have no ill reason for doing so.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that another argument would be that by doing this, we're opening the door to something that's not good for our spiritual life, right? Just by practicing in this. Yeah. Actually, some studies show that people who start yoga for the exercises actually maybe continue it for the spiritual side of things, because you think of people who aren't getting.
I agree.
I don't know if getting spirituality is the right way to say it, but you think of the people who are practicing spirituality. You see people like, oh, I'm spiritual, not religious, or whatever it might be. So they're looking for spirituality elsewhere. This is becoming like a way of people to practice sort of the mind, body, and spirit.
We talked a couple weeks ago about music and how music and dancing specifically takes your body and your soul. When we're doing music in liturgical sense and stuff, it can take your body and your soul and add the two together to praise. You know what I mean? And that's what this is doing in a way. And so you got to be very careful with that. Yeah. Because it can be, like when you're taking the body and the soul and trying to make the two one, which is not a bad thing. And right. We understand that they are two distinct things, but that they're tied together as Catholic. Mm-hmm. They are tied together. They
represent a unity.
Exactly. Yeah. And so but praying together. So people might find, oh my goodness, this is something that I've never encountered before, being able to pray body, mind, soul together. Right. And they're going to discover there's a truth there. Because we're meant to pray that way. We're meant to, that unity that you'd feel, that wholeness that you might feel in that moment is actually a good thing. Yeah. But you got to do, just like eating, just like sleeping, you got to do it the right way, right? Just like, so if you don't do this thing the right way, then you could lead yourself to a really horrible end. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That even if your entry point is the exercise, because I heard it's good for you. What I think attracts a lot of people is more the meditative aspect, and even in kind of yoga itself, recognizing that the exercise, the stretches are the lesser of the 8 branches, is telling to say that this is kind of the entry point for people to get into kind of this deeper meditative practice, which opens you up more broadly to the other kind of practices or the other aspects of yoga, but in some cases could, if you go down these energy healing paths or whatever, can open you up to the diabolic, can open you up to some kind of really bad stuff. But also to the point that we're saying, okay, if we're trying to reconcile, let's take the exercises and, again, fully rebrand them, take them out of this context. If it's that difficult to, walk the knife edge of trying to find a sanctified version of these stretch. Yeah, maybe try something else. Or there are other forms of exercise that you're not necessarily walking this cliff edge that could drop you into something that it is hard to get out of.
Yeah, and I totally see the attraction to it, right? I totally see that people want a whole, like you're saying, the whole body, the whole mind, the whole spirit things. But Matt, you're right. If there's if we have to always be walking the fine line,
it becomes a near occasion.
It becomes a near occasion. Yeah. And this is maybe an issue with this whole topic of yoga because honestly, I don't think because even in this episode, we're talking about things like here are sort of the realities of yoga. Here are sort of what people think yoga is. Here are some other options with soul core. I think you guys mentioned all these things. So the people sometimes don't know. Even when they ask, even when they ask a priest, ask someone, can we do yoga? Can we do these things? You get so many different answers all the time. Yeah. And I'm going to side today. And I'm going to say that, yes, I would say that doing the poses in isolation of anything else has minimal harm to someone, right? But I would say, why not do something else? Yeah. If there's other things associated with it that aren't good for us, why put ourselves in that position? And people might say that I'm being a grouch again and whatever it is. Well, but there is spiritual baggage associated with the practice of yoga. Yeah. And why wouldn't we do something without spiritual baggage? Why put ourselves in that position?
Go to a gym and look at the wall, and I'm sure there's going to be different stretches that you can do before you start lifting weights or whatever the case may be. Yeah. And they aren't going to be yoga poses. You know what I mean? Like you could just do those stretches.
But there's other exercise classes. I know yoga has now become like a really
a brand, almost
popular like a brand. Yeah, and maybe that's what people see it as. It's a brand. Like you go to this brand gym, I go to this brand yoga class, right?
Exactly.
And some people have no idea of the spiritual association with it, right? They just go to yoga class. That's it. Like they go to Zumba class, or they go to dance class, or they go to any other exercise class, right? But if we now know the history, we now know the reason, the associations that yoga has. Mm-hmm. Why not just avoid it? Why not just choose something else with no spiritual baggage?
Why would you walk on that knife heads?
If the flow chart for deciding to do it is like, okay, well, are you doing this in your house? Yeah, okay, then continue. Like, are the curtains drawn? Yes, okay, then let it keep drawn. Like, is anybody looking? Okay, then if it's that difficult, or like that just sounds like a lot of work to me. I like my exercise to be easy. I don't know, but like no, if you want to improve flexibility, take gymnastics. If you want to,
and there's so many videos on YouTube now with so many good, people just kind of offering this exercise classes.
Yeah, different.
You can YouTube like leg exercises, arm exercises, stretching exercises, sitting exercises. Like you can YouTube anything, and someone is teaching you these things.
Yeah,
right?
And it has no affiliation to any religion.
Yeah, I'm going to be a grouch, and I'm going to say no to yoga today. And you guys don't have to agree with me, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Yeah.
I think we've made a good case.
And yoga as such, I completely agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, maybe there's people out there who will not agree, and we'll say, and there are people I've heard personally, people who say, yoga has really improved my life, my flexibility, my health, whatever it might be. And maybe they know about the spiritual side of yoga. Maybe they don't, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But if someone wants to vehemently disagree or agree, you can drop us a comment on our social media pages or send us an email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com. So this new year, one of my resolutions won't be yoga, but I will try and find another way of trying to get in shape, I guess.
I might try to do P90X, but just skip that one day. It'll be very, very nice.
And sign me up for more resolutions that involve not doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you guys mentioned Soul Core today, so you can find more information on Soul Core at soulcore.com. Very easy. Okay, so that's all the time we have today. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. Happy New Year again. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.